Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Dairy Signal today. We are so excited to have you back in the new year. But before we dive into today's topic, I just want to thank our national sponsors for partnering with us day in and day out to provide special programs like the Dairy Signal for all of you guys to view. We have some really great topics today. So we have John Geyser here today. He is a dairy nutrition and management consultant at Progressive Dairy Solutions, and he's going to be talking to us all about the feeding do's and don'ts in a low milk price market. John, I know you're a seasoned pro, but I'm going to still have you do a quick introduction for our new viewers here today.
Quick introduction of myself.
Yes,
Oh
absolutely.
boy. Well, that can take the whole hour. Gotten pretty long-winded. Got my PhD in 2008, so I'm coming up on 20 years in the feed industry. I'm walking in my late father's footsteps. My dad was a nutritionist as well as a partner in a dairy with his two brothers. We lost him, unfortunately, a number of years ago, but I enjoy working directly with dairies day in, day out. Stepped back into this role in the last 12 months. Prior to that, I was in a little bit more of a tech service, sort of a higher level role for the prior decade. So I've supported the dairy industry in a number of capacities over the last nearly 20 years. I enjoy contributing with professional dairy producers. I love the foundation, how we reach the industry. Appreciate very much having the platform. I'm an author, write the Feeding Fundamentals column with Hordes Dairyman and the Feed Quality column with Hay and Forage Grower. And then I continue to serve as in an adjunct professor capacity with the University of Wisconsin. So contributing a little bit back to my alma mater. I don't know. Is that good enough?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll have you dive right in. I want you to just, if you could recap 2025 and kind of what you're seeing as we're going into 2026.
Sure. I'll go back to 2008 and 2009 because I think it sets the stage and foundation for at least some of my experiences and where we're going to find ourselves likely in the next 3 to 6 months. So when I came out of graduate school, 2008, 2009, I think probably our dairy industry still remembers quite vividly some of the economic hardship that we experienced. Caitlin, you might not. I'm speculating. Maybe you weren't necessarily signing checks, et cetera, in the dairy industry back in 2008, 2009, but we had some bloodshed back then, economically speaking. So I came out of graduate school in 2008. Had all these fancy letters behind my name and degrees, and I thought that the world was just going to fall over. Everybody was going to open their door and care what I had to say. And I'll try and keep it politically correct on the signal today. Let's just say that my letters behind my name didn't mean a whole lot as we progressed into 2009, and dairies were upside down in the neighborhood of $1 to $2, even $5 a hundredweight or more. Through that period of time, we were some dairies were dumping milk. It was horrendous from an economic dairy economy, and that had a lasting impression upon me. One of the topics that we'll get into today is avoiding shortchanging our cows from a plant and nutrition standpoint, because there are some decisions that we could make that may save us 5, 10, 15 cents a cow a day or 20 cents a cow a day now, but they may have lasting ramifications so as to impact not maybe later lactation or even the offspring that that cow may have, and even granddaughters. So circling back to 2009, I was imprinted, if you will, by just the hardship and some of the cost cutting, some of the experiences coming out of that, but also learned and came away with a tremendous appreciation for our dairy men and women and our dairy owners' resolve to just continue milking cows and taking care of the herd and the herd as family. And so now, as we have gone through a number of cycles, prosperous times, and then unfortunately challenging times, like we are projected to endure in December, milk prices weren't all that great, and we're forecast to slide a little bit backward from there. I'm optimistic, carrying my late dad's mentality in that we're going to find some new efficiencies. We're going to learn from the past, and we're going to come out on the backside of this better. But we're going to cover some of the do's and don'ts today. In terms of 2025, it was a fascinating year to step back into doing diets and ration formulation and helping dairies out. in a direct consulting capacity. We were coming off of pretty solid margins. We now have this beef on dairy sector and segment of our business, some added diversification that's helping out considerably in terms of adding some value per hundredweight to our bottom line, or adding value to our dairies by way of very valuable beef calves. So how we are managing our herd, breeding, and then feeding our herds, it's just very different today relative to 5 years ago and 10 years ago. And we're going to continue to evolve. We need to be responsive at this point now, because we're not only seeing forecasted and projected lower or negative margins falling into the red. We also have a flip-flop in terms of the value of milk fat and the value of milk protein. So we need to be responsive in a couple of ways. One is to make sure we are optimizing our nutrition programs and our feeding programs, but then also being responsive to milk protein now being considerably greater value than milk fat, to the tune of roughly $1, maybe $1.20 per pound, now that protein is carrying over milk fat. So I'm excited where we're going. It's certainly going to be some challenging times, but I want to make sure I stress I got a great appreciation for all of our dairy owners and managers out there that continue taking care of their herd and operating our dairy agribusinesses regardless of the dairy economy. Caitlin, how did I do resetting for 25 and where I think we're going to go in 26?
I think you did great. And I also have to say, I was definitely in grade school during 2008. So
Yeah.
you were right on your guess there.
Yeah. Well, let's dive into it today. I hope and welcome audience participation. Not sure what we have for listeners out there, or if you are listening after the fact on demand, welcome you reaching out and making contact. You can always get a hold of me at john@pdscows.com. I don't think I put my contact information actually up at the back of these slides. I typically haven't used a framework and a slide deck over the last few years. I've sort of freestyled, if you will, and just stood or sat in front of the computer and the mic and talked. But today I opted to put a slide deck together to sort of keep me on track, as you can probably, Caitlin, you're experiencing. I can get pulled off track pretty easily. So hopefully this is like a homing beacon, keeping me on point to get through these different ideas and different topics in terms of how we can optimize our feeding programs over the next 6 to 12 months. Yeah, but I do welcome and hopefully can get some audience participation, bringing in some questions to maybe expand on some of the topics. Speaking to the slide deck today, it's hopefully going to have some great insights for you by way of our conversation. But I also want to acknowledge I used AI pretty heavily in putting the slide deck together today. Not that I jumped on some of these language learning models and said, hey, give me a slide deck, but rather I use AI day in, day out to augment sort of my scientific discoveries or help me do different tasks. And so that would be, I didn't think about this coming into today, but consider using some of the really powerful language learning models, ChatGPT, Grok. There's a gajillion of them out there now to help streamline and help you explore, research, come up with some different ideas in your day-to-day operations. I certainly use that today. This slide deck 5 years ago would have, I speculate, probably taken me 8 to 10 hours to put together. I'm not at all skilled in graphic design. However, I was able to pull some pictures over, and in the matter of an hour to 2 hours, I was able to put this slide deck together from scratch, utilizing a lot of pictures that I've taken out with dairies that I've been on or worked with, and then pulling some other content together. So it's just really cool with these new tools that we have at our fingertips, and hopefully are applicable to the discussion topic at hand today. So I better get into it, or I'm going to find myself now halfway through our allotted time today without really covering any ground. So the format today is going to be a number of do's and then a number of don'ts. So I'll start with the do's. These would be components or areas or just strategies in terms of our feeding program and nutrition, largely in feeding our lactating cows, that we should focus on and ensure that we are doing. And then on the back end, we're going to have don'ts. These are going to be, hey, these are no-nos. These are going to be areas that we want to stay away from, or things that we do not want to do to avoid shortchanging our cows or putting ourselves in a worse economic position than we might have otherwise been. And so again, if you've got questions or you would like to expand on any of these, please jump in. Is it Slido that we're still using to log and register questions and get those out in front of me?
Yes, great point. So if viewers, if you're watching right now, there will be three dots in the bottom right-hand corner. From there, you'll hit the three dots, and then it will ask you your name. You definitely don't have to put your name in it. You can put anonymous. But there you can type in your questions and then just submit it, and we will try to get any and all questions you have answered here today with John.
Excellent. Well, so let's continue tearing into this. So the first discussion topic: balancing our diet with fat and protein, economic value in mind. And so this is what I alluded to before. We've gone from a period of time over the last, I don't know, 2 to 3 years where there has been ramped up butterfat demand, which has been awesome. There's just been more butter consumed, and butter inventories have been short. So we have had economic incentive to produce more butterfat to meet demand. We've done a great job with that. I would say in both genetic selection, in growing our forages, feeding our cows, and then there are some nutritional strategies, different types of fat, some other ingredients that we can bring into the diet that have really pushed the envelope. And now we have Holstein herds that are achieving 4.2, 4.5, even five, in excess of 5% butterfat, 5.1, 5.2, 5.3. In terms of percent butterfat, which is incredible. If you would ask me that 10 years ago, I never thought we would have been capable of doing that, but we're doing it. And now, unfortunately, though, where that fat is not worth what it was, and it's flip flopped, and now milk protein is quite a bit more valuable. So we have an economic signal, a market signal to flip flop our prioritization. And instead of feeding and managing for butterfat, we need to feed and manage for milk protein. And feeding for milk fat, I would say, in my experience, has been maybe a bit more straightforward than feeding for protein. The protein that ends up in milk is a function of both feed protein and microbial protein and metabolizable protein within the rumen. So we really need to optimize two components of the animal's plan of nutrition. One of which is feeding the right protein and amino acid supply, which we'll talk about just in a minute. But the other is optimizing the rumen health and rumen microbial environment to optimize that milk protein. So that is exciting. There are certainly some tools that we have at our disposal, but in terms of the fat, I would suggest that we consider and talk through with our advisory team. Are we still pushing the envelope on feeding for milk fat, or are we putting diets together with milk protein in mind? So from a milk fat standpoint, one of the do's is definitely want to review the fatty acid supplementation we have in the diet. So there are a number of different fat supplements that we've fed dairy cows historically. Over the last, I would say, few years, we've started to get a little bit more specialized in terms of the fatty acid profile that we desire and we want to see in high performing dairy diets. When I broke out of graduate school, and maybe prior to that, we would look at feeding fat for an energy supplementation that would bring both calories to the diet to support milk production, but then also seeking to bring calories into the diet to help manage body condition and avoid losing too much body condition with our fresh and peak cows. Now we have different fat supplements at our disposal with different fatty acid profiles. So palm fat, which is rich in palmitic fat or palmitic acid, it is very helpful to help improve not only energy status, but also, speaking with Dr. Adam Locke, maybe 30 to 40 to 50% of the palm fat that we feed ends up in milk fat. And so now, as milk fat has dropped in value, we need to revisit our fatty acid supplementation, look at the fatty acid profile of all the fats we have in the diet, and just have a discussion. Is this optimal? Do we want to continue down this path or not? Turning back our focus to milk protein. So I spoke about a couple of different pathways to optimizing milk protein, one being the feed and supplemental protein. So first and foremost, we want to put and ensure that we have high quality ingredients supplying the protein in the diet, because about half of the protein in milk protein comes from supplemental protein. But over the last 20 years, we have learned the impact that amino acid supplementation can have on animal health, microbial protein yield, milk protein yield, and overall milk yield as well. So amino acids, specifically lysine and methionine, have been two that we have focused upon to a great extent in the last couple of decades. But then there are others, histidine and arginine as well, that we can look at supplementing in specific situations if the diet is maybe lacking a little bit. Every dairy is going to be different. corresponding to the different feeds that we have in the diet, what the cost of different ingredients are. And so we need to take a look at our Cornell net carbohydrate and protein system based models, the CNCPS nutrition models, and then NASEM models are now pretty adept at identifying where there are opportunities to supplement amino acids and maybe increase the plan of nutrition with some supplemental amino acids, or maybe zeroing in on some feeds that have a little bit higher level of specific amino acids in them. But we definitely want to be taking a hard look at our amino acid profile in the diet right now, and carrying discussion in regards to how can we optimize, or maybe how can we tailor the diet to provide a little bit more suitable plan of nutrition from an amino acid standpoint, amino acid supply standpoint, in the interest of optimizing milk protein. Pivoting to another do, stepping away from milk protein and milk fat, do optimize our homegrown feed. So this is cliche at this point. I've got a strong background in forage management and agronomy, et cetera. We've talked a lot in the last 5 to 10 years about crop quality coming in, how to manage for higher quality crop. But now that the crops are harvested and under plastic, we can still optimize, I would say, their inclusion levels in the diet. The forages that we feed and the amount of forage that we feed are limited in many different ways. Historically, they've been limited in terms of inventory. We just can't feed anymore. But coming out of 2025, we had pretty strong yields for much of the U.S. The northeastern U.S. didn't have nearly as strong of yields as, say, the Midwestern U.S., and the quality is a little bit different. But we have all the incentive to push the envelope in terms of how much forage we're feeding right now. And if we haven't looked at our forage feeding levels in the last couple of years, now's the time to do so. Just because we did it this way a year ago and we're kind of used to this forage feeding level, we know when our inventories are going to run out. That doesn't necessarily mean we should keep doing it that way. So have a discussion, make sure first and foremost we have an assessment of our inventories. But then if our inventories would permit, let's take a look at how much forage we are feeding, and then look at the carbohydrate side of our diet, fermentable starch, undigestible carbohydrates, and fiber. Those can be some of the metrics that we can look at in our diets. And maybe we have a little bit of room to push forage a little bit harder. Maybe we can feed another pound or two of dry matter. And it's going to be really important to watch intakes and performance. Obviously, we can't be giving up any energy corrected milk as we push farm grown feeds and these levels a little bit higher. But now's the time to try pushing the envelope again, which we may not have done, or if we haven't done it over the last couple of years. Because from a, generally speaking, for the upper Midwest and where we have adequate rainfall to grow our crops, our forages are going to be our lowest cost feed ingredients. Out west and down south, it's a little bit different story. Forage is actually average to above average in terms of a cost per ingredient relative to some other purchase feeds. But definitely take a look at what we may do or might be able to do in terms of feeding a little bit more corn solids, a little bit more haylage, a little bit more dry hay, if we have it. I had another point that was just top of mind. I lost it. Hopefully it comes back.
It will come back.
Oh, yeah. And I think I'm going to hit on this again, but in terms of optimizing and feeding a little bit more forage, also don't assume that our forage is consistent in terms of moisture or nutritional value. Thinking back to conversations I had with producers, larger growers, and dairies last year, the heterogeneity, there's my big word of the day, heterogeneity, the variation in the 2025 crop for silage was extreme, was absolutely extreme. And I'm seeing it on farm. We're seeing stratification in bunkers and piles, and we're seeing changes in nutritional value for bigger masses of feed that we're feeding out of at a pretty high clip. But I would suggest it's in our best interests to maybe step up our feed testing and make sure we have a rock solid understanding of what the forage quality is as we feed through these crops. Don't assume that 1 or 2 feed tests is going to be indicative of that forage. That is absolutely not the case. And lo and behold, here's the next point in terms of do's. So not only are farm-grown feeds and forages in terms of feed testing, but also consider taking a look at your purchased feeds. In my experience in the last 5-ish years, 10 years, there's been some hidden nutritional value in some of our purchased feeds that we haven't necessarily known about. So today's feed testing at the commercial labs is pretty robust. We can look at nutrition profile with, I would say, routine feed analyses. So definitely advocating for understanding and stepping up our feed testing, not only with forages, but commodity feeds as well, just so that we're optimizing the diet from a nutrient standpoint and avoiding spending a little bit more, or maybe we can squeeze a few pennies out of an ingredient that's bringing a little bit greater nutritional value than we previously understood without feed testing. Do not assume that the diet formulation software, the feed library values, don't assume that those are accurate. In my experience, they're largely not. And feeds will ebb and flow corresponding to crop year, but also production plant, sometimes within production plant. So this is a very valuable point to grab hold of. And there may be 5 or 10 cents per cow per day hidden that we would have never otherwise found. And cows don't necessarily show us this in the bulk tanker and components either, but it's a hidden underlying feed cost opportunity that we have in a lot of cases. Transitioning to another do, this one should go without saying, but break down all of the ingredients in our diet. I would say itemize them and then look at the cost of each ingredient, especially additives, any supplements that we have in the diet or additives, nutritional technologies. Take a look at, all right, what's it costing us? And then what is the expected impact? What are we looking for these ingredients to do? If the ingredient is in the diet, there's more than likely a really good reason as to why we put it in there and why we still have it in there. But now, and I'm going to use the term audit a few times over today, we definitely want to be auditing many different aspects of our feeding program, with feed costs representing easily 50% of the cost to produce a 100 weight of milk. So break down all the ingredients in your diet, put together an itemized list, and then a cost per cow per day, and just talk through those and make sure we're all in a consensus as to why those additives are in the diet. Or if there's some question as to why they're in the diet, well, then we can take some action. But it starts with breaking them out and looking at the itemized cost. Continuing to use the word and term audit. So not only looking at the diet on paper, so to speak, but also audit the feed program from top to bottom. There are some groups out there that have done wonderful, wonderful work in terms of TMR audits and auditing feeding programs, but there's a lot that we can do as well, just driving through our feed center, looking at bunk calls, maybe looking at some of our feeding records and looking at feed timing, looking at feeding accuracy. So now's the time to be a bit more proactive in looking at how well we are doing delivering nutrients to cows on time in the desirable amounts. And so that's easy for me to say from a high level. There are many different aspects to delivering nutrients to cows. We have the diet formulated that we would expect, hopefully taking into account some of the points that I discussed previously. But now in terms of getting the feeds purchased or mixed with our farm grown feeds, blended up, delivered to cows, and then monitoring refusals, there are a lot of opportunities in that entire process for things to, I won't say go sideways, but maybe there are a couple of efficiencies that we can realize, uncover, and then capture. So walk through, do an audit, maybe work with your consulting team, and just look at our feeding programs from top to bottom. Also look at our mixers, make sure that our mixer maintenance is up to speed, our scales are accurate, and then we're going to be in better position to deliver the nutrients that we need to per every cow every day. I could probably go on this topic for another hour, but if there are any questions, Caitlin, coming through, please throw those my direction. So
yeah, one question I had for you, John, is shrink is so important, especially during some of these economic times. Do you have any tips and tricks on how to prevent some of that shrink? I know it kind of goes with the feeding audit, but wasn't sure if you had any more insights on for our viewers today.
That's a good question. So shrink can result from overfeeding and wasting feeds or nutrients. Shrink can result from Mother Nature, whether it be wind, blowing ingredients around, especially in drier climates. Shrink can result from weather events, rain or snow, either damaging ingredients or covering feeds or washing it away. Shrink can also result from just errors in feeding accuracy. And each of those areas warrants taking a look at. In terms of feeding, and I can't remember if this is another point that I have, I think it is in the don'ts area, but we need to be really careful and be making bump calls more frequently through the next few months because we need to, I would say, optimize. I don't know that we'll be able to completely eliminate shrink, but optimize our shrink and the feed offered relative to refuse. Um, were there any shrink areas, Caitlin, that were in your mind that I could dive into a little bit deeper?
I was just thinking weather control just because every farm is kind of different. We haven't had as much snow that we've had this year, at least in Wisconsin, but wasn't sure if there were any tips or tricks. Nothing specific, just thinking in my back of my mind what different weather conditions we'll have here, especially in the spring that we may need to prepare for and think about when thinking about shrink.
Yeah, especially with mud. I mean, mud is really tough from a shrink standpoint, and so I don't know that I have any brilliant thoughts in terms of how to reduce our shrink when we get really wet and muddy conditions. One thing that we can consider is on-farm premixes, and so that's a way that we can tighten up our feeding accuracy. So, for example, if we were loading corn grain into, I don't know, 10 mixes in a day, if we could potentially mix that corn grain with another protein ingredient or protein mix and load a larger batch, that can do a couple of things. One, it can reduce our shrink and reduce some of our feed wastage in terms of some errors that might be attributable to each batch, but it can also save us some time and effort in terms of labor. And so that's another area we can find maybe a penny or two per hundredweight is just reducing the amount of time that we're spending in getting our cows fed. On the flip side of that, I've seen some pretty cool gains in health and performance from feeding cows actually more frequently. And so we don't want to necessarily cut back our labor and feeding time to the point where we're costing our cows. So you may opt to consider feeding cows 2 or even 3 times a day or making some additional batches in the morning and delivering them later in the day just to gain a little bit in terms of feed conversion efficiency. That's going to be a bigger talking point for us, I think, into the future. Good question. On the flip side of gaining efficiency, now's a good time to also audit our feed quality and look for anti-nutritional factors. And so this is an area that I've done quite a bit of work alongside other colleagues over the last 10 to 15 years. But looking for different attributes in our feeds, whether they be nutritional or particle size or anti-nutritional factors like opportunistic mold or yeast or even negative bacteria that may exist within feed. There are far too many of these, I would say, efficiency robbers out there that will either relate to lesser than ideal feed conversion efficiency or even activating the cow's immune system and causing maybe just a little bit, not clinical symptoms, but perhaps activating the immune system a touch to the point that that cow is then expending some energy on her immune system or diverting some energy toward her immune system. And so I would say this is a good period of time to go through and audit our feeds for cleanliness, looking for mold and yeast and opportunistic bacteria, and then also looking at our forage and grain particle sizes. So on the left-hand side of the screen here, I like to walk cows and look at undigested particles. That's pretty insightful a lot of times to help us see where we have some inefficiencies. Manure sampling, thinking back to Mike Hutchins, my dear friend and mentor, he has long been teaching us that taking manure samples for starch in particular can be is very insightful for us to help for us to find suboptimal grain and starch digestibility. So now is the time of year to start doing some of that, especially as we get into feeding new crop feeds. The goal is to have less than 1% fecal starch. That tells us that we are optimizing the grain in the diet. And then also consider maybe working with some vendors or folks that have infrared cameras and look for heating in feed. So this time of year, it's cool. We don't necessarily see mold and yeast growth like we do in warmer and wetter periods of the year, but there are often anti-nutritional factors growing in our feeds that we can't see with our naked eye. So infrared cameras can be very helpful to find some of these spoilage organisms growing in our feed. So find these, uncover them, put together an action plan. In a lot of cases, we don't necessarily need to bring an additive into the diet. We can make some management changes to improve in these areas. So those are the areas that we want to find, we want to uncover, so that hopefully we can gain a unit or two in feed conversion efficiency. Staying on the topic of do's, we do want to be aggressive in bidding out our lactating and protein premixes. And so there will certainly be differences between feed suppliers in the cost per ton of a protein mix or a premix. And so now will certainly be a great time to maybe get a few different bids on our protein and premix formulas, just to make sure we're getting the best costs on our formulas and maybe saving a few pennies. The last of our do's, and this one maybe wouldn't have been first to come to mind, but I appreciate my colleague Matt Bedine in helping to think through these do's and don'ts and just covering all of our bases as we head into more challenging milk prices. Look at our grouping strategies in terms of our lactating herds, but then also our calf and heifer herd, just to make sure that we don't have far too many animals on feed. Right now, with as valuable as our replacements are, maybe there's an opportunity to sell a few replacements if our heifer herd inventory is above where it needs to be. And then flipping back to the lactating herd, there are a number of different strategies and philosophies with regards to how we group animals. But there is one philosophy in terms of grouping low producing cows and later lactation cows together, and then formulating a diet that is, I would say, different in energy profile and typically lower in cost than fresh cow or peak lactation or high cow diet. So have some discussions with your advisory team about grouping strategies and just ensure that we cover all of our bases through the next 6 to 12 months. All right, Caitlin, do we have any other questions on the do's? Otherwise, I'm going to flip the script and we're going to go to the don'ts in terms of do not do these things.
I don't have any that have come in yet.
All right, well, we will just keep on rolling then like a freight train. So over the next 10-ish slides and maybe 15 to 20 minutes, we're going to cover a number of don'ts, things that we do not want to do, or if we are thinking about doing these, we got to be extra cautious. The number one don't is do not reduce essential nutrients. And so I'm going to be a little bit of a broken record here as I'm talking about we can't be putting our cows in position through a substandard plate of nutrition. Nutrition. I'm kind of rhyming here as I go through this first one. We don't want to be putting our cows in position with a substandard plate of nutrition, kind of sound like a rapper, where we reduce essential nutrients, look to save costs, maybe 5-10 cents, but we put our cows in a position that is tougher to rebound from, or we are going to negatively affect the offspring, like I mentioned before in the introduction. So in terms of our energy supply, amino acids, like I mentioned before, amino acid and metabolized protein supply, we can't be shortchanging our cows in terms of the essential nutrients. And I would say vitamins and trace minerals would fall under this umbrella as well. Thinking back to 2008 and 2009, the extreme economic hardship, I can speak from personal experience of some situations where we even pulled out vitamin and trace minerals just because we were looking to cut costs at an extreme level. That was not the right decision. We suffered in breeding and health over the next 6 to 18 months where cows were just not fed and supplemented with the right vitamins and trace minerals. Those are very important to have in our diets, our personal diets, our herds diets, our pets diets. Everybody's diets needs essential vitamins and trace minerals, as well as our macronutrients, like I mentioned before, in carbohydrates and proteins. So we want to make sure we maintain an adequate plan of nutrition for all of our animals. In line with that, we also do not want to be cutting down on our grain. So we certainly want to be optimizing our farm-grown feeds, but not to the point where we lose energy-corrected milk yield. So there's a situation, hypothetically, if we are $2 per hundredweight in the red, and so we are making $2 less than it costs to feed and milk our herd, conceivably, we could be in a better economic position by reducing our feed costs by that $2 and trying to break even. The challenge is if we lose energy corrected milk, yes, we've reduced our feed costs, but we've then also increased our cost per hundredweight of our labor, of our principal and interest, and all of the other, I would say, fixed expenses that exist. If we're producing less milk, then that's less milk to dilute the other costs again. So yes, feed costs are a big portion of our budget, but we can't be giving up milk through this next challenging economic period if we indeed head in the direction that we're forecast. We need to maintain performance because cows are also not necessarily able to just flip the light switch and come back on if we cut back on the nutrients and grain, we lose some milk. That milk may not come back, especially for our peak cows. If we give up 2 to 4 pounds in peak milk, that's not going to be recovered later in lactation. We'll be dropping off in terms of persistency. Staying on that theme, do not cut back on our essential amino acids for a few reasons. One, like I mentioned before, we are incentivized currently to prop up and improve milk protein. But our essential amino acids are also important for animal health, many different functions and biochemical reactions and metabolism within the animal, and then also to support our offspring. So we want to make sure that we keep an adequate plane of nutrition in place, especially with amino acids right in line with vitamins and trace minerals. So I've covered grain, I've covered energy, and or rather protein and metabolizable protein. And the last component I'm gonna hit on is just energy overall. And I'm really zeroing in on fat here. So we've discussed fat supplementation earlier in terms of making sure that we have the right fatty acid supply and fatty acid supplementation in the diet. And fats are quite expensive right now, ranging from $1,400 to $1,800 per ton. So somewhere around 60 cents to 90 cents a pound. So cutting back on our fat can certainly shave some feed costs pretty quickly. However, we have to make sure that we're maintaining body condition. So with today's high performing dairy cows, especially at the component levels that I was mentioning before, 4.5, 5.0 in terms of milk fat, 3.4, 3.5 in terms of milk protein. A lot of the high performing herds are hitting right now with excellent milk production. That's a lot of fat and that's a lot of protein ending up in milk. And the fat specifically, in some cases, cows are in a negative energy balance, especially post-fresh and as they approach peak lactation where they can't necessarily eat enough calories. And so that fat often comes from adipose tissue, and in a lot of cases, the only way to replace or manage that is with supplemental fat. So be careful in our fat feeding strategy. Don't pull fat all out. It may look good on paper for a week or two, but if we start losing in body condition score, that's not only going to hurt those cows from I would say a performance standpoint later on in the later lactation, but also may affect breeding as well. All right, feed additives coming back. So I mentioned, and we need to certainly itemize and take a look at all the additives and feed nutritional technologies we have in the diet, but we don't want to be cutting any additives that are positively affecting rumen and cow health. And so as I speak to cow health, really immunity, there are quite a few different nutritional supplements now available that can prop up and support the immune system. Historically, these would have classically been defined as maybe binders or something to mitigate mycotoxins. That's not necessarily what I'm talking about here. There are bioactive ingredients now that when introduced in the diet can support and prop up the immune system, help cows in dealing with some of whether it be pathogens or other stresses that are out there. So as we're looking through our itemized list and we're looking at the costs, I would say also add another column to that matrix that we're looking at with feed additives, and not only consider the return on investment from a production standpoint, but also consider the health ramifications of those ingredients, because we do not want to be cutting the feed additives and supplements that are helping in terms of rumen and cow health. And I'm just beating this drum. Do not cut costs to the point that it negatively affects milk yield. We just can't be doing that. Like I mentioned before, if we cut back on our milk yield and ship milk per cow per day, Labor and other costs are not going to change. So we're actually increasing our costs per hundredweight in those other areas, which in some cases may outweigh any gains we had made in terms of lesser feed costs. So we need to keep cows performing at, I would say, an optimal level. What optimum is for your dairy is going to be different from a dairy down the road, but we want to be avoiding milk yield losses. And I mentioned before, we can't necessarily turn milk production back on in better economic conditions. So we have to certainly look through and make sure we're feeding the best diet, the optimal diet in terms of feed costs, and look for efficiencies and maybe uncover some areas that we can gain a few pennies, but we can't be sacrificing production. Coming back to our feed program audit that we discussed a little bit before and shrink, as we go through and we look at our feeding program and quality control, it may be tempting to feed to a clean feed bunk or maybe cut our refusals from 5% to 2%. Because if we've got a TMR right now that's worth, I don't know, 10 to 14 cents per pound of dry matter, and if we cut it back from 5% to 2%, that may be dime savings per cow per day. However, 2% refusals can be done. However, we need to be making bunk calls and we need to be watching dry matter intakes very closely on a daily basis. 2% refusals is not for everybody. 5% leaves us a little bit of wiggle room. So if we have a rain event like we were discussing before, Caitlin, forage moistures change. If our forage moistures increase and we don't have as much forage in the diet at 5%, we'll have feed in front of cows. Whereas if we're feeding to 2% and we don't catch a moisture change corresponding to a bigger snowfall or rain event, that can really hurt us. If cows are without feed for an hour to 2 hours a day, that is going to create some disruptions in terms of rumen metabolism, eating behavior, and that can end up costing us in feed conversion efficiency and a few pounds of milk. And then all of a sudden that 10-cent cost savings by way of cutting back on our refusals can be doubled and tripled in terms of economic loss if we lose a couple pounds of milk. So we need to be careful. If we're going to cut back on refusals and feed offered, we need to make sure that we have our feed program management in place in terms of bunk calls and moisture monitoring on a several times per week, if not daily basis, to feed those tighter bunks. Still in the feed category, but this is a little bit more in terms of herd management. Here's another example of me using Grok this morning to show a really healthy cow, really healthy. She is quite wide. And this is my attempt to depict cows that may not be paying for themselves in terms of milk yield relative to the feed that they consume. So take a look at milk production for all the cows in the herd, and at say $14.50, $15 milk, look at what it costs to feed those cows relative to what they are giving us in terms of milk revenue, and find those cows that are not paying their way, they're not paying for the groceries, and consider either shipping them and capturing high cull cow prices, or potentially managing them differently where you put them on a maintenance or a dry cow ration if they've got a valuable calf within them. There can be some other strategies in terms of putting together non-lactating groups just so that we can potentially gain those calves down the line. But we do not want to be putting lactating rations in front of cows that are producing 30, 40, 50 pounds of milk through challenging milk prices. We want to make sure that the cows are at least paying for the feed that they're consuming. So I've mentioned this a few times over, and I'm now going to phrase it a little bit differently, but don't do anything that's going to inadvertently increase our labor and other fixed costs per hundredweight. And the way that this ends up happening is where we give up milk. So I don't know how many times, Caitlin, I've said that today, like we can't be giving up milk. So this is my less than subtle attempt at driving that point home, but we can't be giving up milk. We can't be giving up milk as we look for efficiencies and seek to lessen our feed costs per hundredweight of milk over the next few months. So just keep this in the back of your mind. Okay, so I've gotten to the end of the do's and the don'ts. I see we're about 35, 40, 45 minutes into our discussion today. I'll pause, take a breath, and ask, do we have some questions that have come in? Have I bored everybody to death? Is there any sort of engagement out there?
Definitely not bordering us. I know I'm learning a heck of a lot. One question I had for you, John, though, is sometimes our dairy producers go out and smell their corn silage and they can smell that acetic acid and alcohol, and it smells really bad. Because we're not trying to have any impact on herd intakes or performance on milk, do you have any tips and tricks to help producers that might be facing some of that?
Yeah, so this goes in line with my comment earlier about looking for the efficiency robbers or factors that are going to be shortchanging us in our feed conversion efficiency. And it's as though you and I are a wonderful working pair here this afternoon, because I've got one slide on this point and topic, and I was actually just conversing with another colleague who's seeing some of this out in the upper Midwest. Corn silage, and this is another example of me using Grok to generate some graphics. So I'm going to walk us through a science lesson here, and it was amazing how quick I was able to get this done. It took only about 3 minutes for me to generate these graphics. But in the upper right-hand corner, we can see this. Consider us chopping our feed, whether it be corn silage or haylage, covering it up, packing it first and covering it up and excluding all the oxygen. And then our feed starts fermenting. So the blue line in the upper right-hand corner, this is the feed pH. And so the fermentation process, without going into detail, we get the air out, and then fermenting bacteria begin to metabolize and ferment some soluble carbohydrates and create fermentation acids in the absence of oxygen. And what the fermentation acids then do is decrease the pH, getting us to a point where we then have a stable feed by way of low pH. It's been acidified and nothing can grow. So here, the blue line is our feed pH. And so from 0 to 24 hours after we pack and cover the feed, you can see our pH drops nicely, which happens because of lactic acid production by fermenting bacteria. I'm certainly a big advocate for inoculants, bacterial inoculants that aid this process. I believe in that science and technology. There is a secondary pathway or a few secondary pathways that can happen where we seal our feed up and we get lactic acid production, but then we start to see a little bit of acetic acid production. If we use an inoculant like Lactobacillus buchneri, this is desirable, and this is a strategic path that we want to see happening. I mentioned acetic acid now for two reasons. One, acetic acid can help feed stability. So, Caitlin, you mentioned acetic acid before in terms of feed smelling a little bit off. So, if we inoculated our feed with a Lactobacillus buchneri and we end up with some acetic acid in a lower amount, that's a good thing, and that's going to help us in terms of feed preservation and feed out quality, lower yeast, lower mold. Acetic acid is a food grade preservative. So the pH can drop, we get some acetic acid production and alongside our lactic acid production. But something we're starting to see in some 2025 silages and some, maybe to a lesser extent, some late back of bunker 2024 silages, we get our pH drop, we have some lactic acid production, but we've got really high acetic acid levels in some corn silage. And then we're starting to see some alcohol production in these silages as well. So if you follow this graphic here down in the bottom left-hand corner, our lactic acid might be 5, 6, 7%, but we're seeing some really high acetic acid levels, maybe as high as the lactic acid level. And that's curious to me. That's not by design. I can't see any situations where this would be a good thing. I don't entirely, admittedly, understand why we're getting such high acetic acid levels. I've got a few working hypotheses, but high acetic acid in conjunction with higher alcohol levels, ethanol and some other alcohols, we are seeing some fermentations in corn silage that have been greatly affected, I think, by growing conditions, and then probably growing conditions coupled with whatever the scientific term is epiphytic, or meaning natural bacteria were on that crop at harvest. We're seeing some high acetic acid levels and high ethanol and other alcohol levels in some of our corn silages. I actually looked at one of Rock River Laboratories. They've got a few different apps to look at feed quality or feed analysis data over time. And I looked at acetic acid levels in all the samples that they've analyzed over the last 6 to 12 months. They are seeing this increase on a larger scale with all corn silage samples through the lab. So I think this is attributable to our growing season last year, but this is going to be a talking point for us because there's not necessarily a feed additive that we can introduce to the diet. What does acetic acid level do? Yes, it's helpful and it reduces spoilage mold and yeast, like I mentioned before, when we inoculate with like a Lactobacillus buchneri. But if we get very high acetic acid levels in conjunction with high ethanol or other alcohol levels, they can be disruptive in a couple of ways. One, cows have senses far beyond yours and mine, Caitlin. And so I won't necessarily say you're as bad as I am, but I can't smell hardly anything. Like I can barely hear, and my smell's awful. Cows are way better than me in a lot of ways, including just their sensory with their smell and their ears and smell and taste in particular. Cows will smell and sense things that we can't fathom. And so these silages, these very odorous silages, cows are picking up on that and they're backing off in terms of feed intake. I think that cows can handle acetic acid and they can handle ethanol and other alcohols to a point, but I think there are probably some other compounds in these silages that are I won't say dramatically negatively affecting the rumen metabolism and that rumen microenvironment, but there's some things going on because we're starting to see some situations of maybe variable digestion, a little bit less ideal of rumen health and cow performance, feed conversion efficiency. So this is the new talking point for us, especially as we start to open more 2025 corn silages, and one that I certainly welcome helping out and exploring and understanding. But I expect that we'll be hearing a little bit more about in the months to come.
Awesome. Well, thanks for covering that. I have a couple final questions for you before we wrap up. I know we're getting here to the end of the hour. One question I had, you had mentioned feed sampling your haylage and corn silage. Is there a rule of thumb as to how often you should be sampling that?
Hmm. It depends upon a couple of things. One is how much feed we're removing from the silos, and that is really a function of the herd size. I would say at least monthly, and then as we get to multiple thousand cows per farms, biweekly to weekly to maybe even more frequently for our really, really big dairies, but at least monthly, at least
Okay.
monthly.
Awesome. And then the last final question I have for you is that you covered a lot of great information today. What are like three key takeaways you want our viewers to take with them here today?
Well, do you want to guess at the first one? Because I've hit on it about
Don't
10
cut
times.
milk yield.
Yeah, don't cut where we lose milk yield. So that would be number one. And number two is don't assume anything. Just go through that audit term. I used it a number of times. It may be uncomfortable at times because we're going to be reviewing and maybe looking over folks' shoulders that have been working with us and working for our dairies for a long time. But just go through and say, hey, we're just doing this as a team. We're auditing to make sure that we're doing everything we can to deliver nutrients on time and in precise amounts to cows. So don't lose milk, audit our feed program, assume nothing. And then I think the last one will be on the anti-nutritional front. Can't hurt to take a look at some factors that may be robbing us of a few calories or maybe robbing us of some performance. So don't assume that our feeds are clean just because they look okay. Consider some other tools at our disposal to look for some anti-nutritional factors and just make sure that we have clean feed.
Awesome. Well, thank you, John. And we greatly appreciate always having your insights here on the Dairy Signal. I just also want to thank our national partners again for working with professional dairy producers and being able to provide programs like the Dairy Signal. Before we leave today, I just want to highlight a few different professional dairy producers programs that are coming up. One of which is our Cornerstone Leadership Dairy Academy, and applications are closing here on January 15th. So if you head over to pdpw.org, you can click Cornerstone on our upcoming programs and apply for the program. But I just want to remind everyone too that our annual business conference is also less than 2 months away. So now's the time to get in your registrations. We have a lot of great speakers and our flyer is now out. So you can visit our website again for that flyer update. But again, just want to thank John and the rest of our viewers for tuning in here today. And with that, we will see you on Thursday on the Dairy Signal.